for their own fees, essentially. So you'd be the contractor, you're not eligible, but your client is. And it just has a positive effect, as well as being like a really good thing. They, perhaps they want to spend more with you, or you can support them with their claim, which has this, I guess, positive feedback loop.
Okay, brilliant. I think
Cool.
we're still seeing people come through, but at about 5 past we'll kick off. I have just seen Paz has joined us, and she is the facilitator extraordinaire. So now I'm feeling a bit of pressure because she is amazing at running these. Also, I'm going to run you through just quickly how you can use the system to interact. So if Tom or Alex ask you any questions and that type of thing, you can jump in with some of these emojis. So on the side, you'll see on the right, left side of the screen, there is a reaction. So at any point, you can jump in with one of these really creative emojis that they've got in here. And you can even reply with a soundboard, and I'll just enable that for everyone. If you have something to jump in, so potentially they ask a question, if you could just use the Q button, so you can say, I have a comment, I have a question, I have an idea, and then they will say, hey, Elizabeth, I'd love to hear from you, and you can unmute yourself, so that you can do that at the bottom of your own window, your little window piece, and then feel free to jump into the chat as well. It might be easier if you go through the queue options while we're in the middle of it, in case we're not looking, but I'll keep an eye out on the chat panel for anything. But thank you guys for joining. Just a little bit of context, if you haven't really heard about Aussie Founders Club or had any interaction before seeing this event pop up or seeing it in a channel, I run an events first community that has a bit of a media arm on the back of it, and we do a lot of our events in Melbourne, and we'll cover a bunch of different topics that are related to not just founders, but people in the startup ecosystem. So sometimes it's around community. We definitely cover topics that startup employees will find of relevance as well. And this is a bit of a pilot program that I'm trialing, because I'm very aware that I call myself, or not myself, the community Aussie Founders Club, and yet if you're not in Melbourne, you can't access one of our events. So I'm really trying to extend the reach and impact of Aussie Founders Club. And I think this is a really good way to do it. So we're really excited to be kicking this off with Alex and Tom to come talk about R&D and how you can use that to really use it as a growth mechanism within your business. So I actually am going to sit back now. I'll watch the chat. I am going to hand over to Tom. So just a bit of context. We have Tom from BlueRock. He is going to cover R&D and what that actually looks like. And then Alex is going to come in from another perspective about some of the services that he runs that can actually help you access that grant a bit faster. But I will hand over, and
very good.
Tom, if
Thanks,
you want
Megan.
to share your screen and kick off, that'd be great.
On it now. Alrighty, should be sharing for you now. Oh, and I don't think I can see you when I'm sharing, so please call out if you need me. Are we all good? You can see it, Megan?
Yeah, we got you.
Cool, thank you. All right, hello everyone. Tom, as Megan said, and I am an R&D incentives advisor, or more broadly, a grants and incentives advisor. So my business, or my service offering is built around helping usually innovative companies access funding. It's characterized as being through a government program more often than not, and it's being a grant or an incentive. Difference being a grant is like a competitive funding that you would need to apply to, and most often you're competing against others for a limited pool. And when we use the term incentive, that's more of an entitlement. It's sort of like, if you do this, if you behave in this way, you're entitled to this funding. And those are really awesome to work with, because they are the way that I guess there's less ambiguity. Should be careful. There's definitely a lot of ambiguity. But when a business, especially with the R&D tax incentive, when they undertake R&D, they're entitled to the money. Like often it's better to think of it as, well, hang on, the ATO is holding my money now. and they're just sort of paying it back to me. So today's really about an overview. There is a lot of information about this program online, probably too much, and probably quite, or not probably, but it is very disjointed. So hopefully just bring together and some of the key points into one place and help you understand the fundamentals. But certainly today's not a deep dive on what is the R&D tax incentive. I'm not going to go around quoting tax law to you, or I'll try not to, and talk about a few tips and tricks. So I wanted to try and share a few things you won't find online, and sort of, yeah, get you, those of you who are either yourselves thinking about a claim, maybe you're already claiming, or could want to be in a position to talk to others. I noted in the chat there was a few who are sort of like, hey, I'm a service provider, but I think my clients or some of my contacts could be claiming this. Try and give you some tips and tricks so that you could, I guess, have a more applied knowledge of how it all works. Cool. Just quick about BlueRock. So BlueRock's a professional services firm out of Melbourne. We have 300 odd people. I actually live in Christchurch in New Zealand. I'm a remote worker, but my team are most of them in Melbourne. And BlueRock's about having better business, better life. So at its heart, it's really an accounting firm and a wealth firm. But all these other services that we provide that are on the screen now, and it's intended to be a one-stop shop for the business owner, for the, yeah, I guess you don't have to be a business owner, but it plays well. Our service offering plays well to business owners. And so if you are looking for a provider in that space, it would be worth checking out the BlueRock website and seeing whether we appear to be a fit for you. So R&D tax incentive. So I'm guessing you hear a lot about this because it's a sort of program for funding that is sometimes it's in the news. There's usually a bit of LinkedIn chatter about it. It is very widely accessible in Australia to fund research and development and innovation activity. There is usually around $1.8 billion access per year, and it comes in the form of tax offsets. And for certain businesses, the tax offsets are refundable. So in a situation like this, we're talking with startup, scale up, founders. They might go, well, hang on, I don't pay any tax, so this isn't relevant to me yet. But what's really important, and it plays very well into what Alex is going to talk about, is that you can actually get a refund on your R&D spend without paying any tax. That's kind of the point. This is the Australian federal government's main program for funding innovation in early stage business in Australia by far. Everything else kind of pales in comparison. So to be eligible, what do you have to do? You have to be a company in Australia. There are a couple of exceptions to that, but we deal with them very rarely. Trusts, for example, sole traders, not going to be eligible. You need to spend a minimum of $20,000 per year on research and development. And we can talk later a little bit about what can be included in that. And then there are three more things that I guess boxes that definitely have to be ticked. If you don't tick these, you cannot claim the R&D. So they are that you own the results of the work that you're undertaking, that you take the risk, especially the financial risk. So if the project falls over, if there's overspend, etc., that's on you, and that you control the project. The next two terms in the middle of the slide there are really important for claiming the R&D. They're new knowledge and technical uncertainty. So you need to be developing new knowledge. Now, the rules talk about developing new knowledge on a worldwide basis. So in other words, you are going to advance that field of science or technology to a place it isn't yet. And it talks about having new or improved products, processes, and there are other things as well, services, devices, etc. But broadly speaking, it's products and processes. And it talks about technical uncertainty or technical risk, which really boils down to, we don't know the answer yet. There's a couple of ways that plays out. One of the more hidden parts of that rule is that it talks about these things being in the public domain. So you might come along and you might be building something that is new and innovative, but there is a provider of that out there, and they might protect that. It might be their IP, so they don't share it. It might be that they have a patent over it, so you can't copy it. You can still innovate in that field. There's a bit of a silly example, but you could, we often talk about, well, Pepsi can have R&D and Coca-Cola can have R&D. It's okay. They're not openly sharing their recipes. And you really need to follow a systematic process that looks and feels like an experiment to qualify. Now, in the real world, that's a bit kind of, often that is a bit sort of, is it square peg, round hole? Round peg, square hole? Either of those. Because the type of language that the government wants to see is that type of language that you might do in a high school science experiment. This is my aim, this is my method, so on and so forth. These are my variables. The real world R&D probably doesn't progress like that, at least not in a business. It certainly would in a university or I guess a clinical trial or drug development or something like that. But it doesn't, I guess, what you need to get used to if you're going to be a claimant or be working with claimants is that kind of language will be applied to what you're doing. And more often than not, we talk to people and I say, hang on a minute, this was an experiment. We just perhaps weren't thinking of that at the time. So ultimately, what is the benefit? Why would I apply for this? A company, especially a loss-making company that isn't paying tax, can get up to 43.5% back of its R&D spend. So in a simple example, if I go out and spend $100,000 in this coming financial year on research and development that is eligible, when I go to put my tax return in at the end of the year, I will claim back $43,500. So that real cost to me was actually only $56,500. And you can include things like salaries, contractor payments, you can include overheads like subscriptions, you can include hosting costs, you can include materials if you're developing physical prototypes. So there's all these things that can be included, and you add them all up at the end of financial year, and you come to a figure that we call the R&D expenditure, and then you claim on that expenditure. So there's a bit of a process with that I'll go through in a minute. Just to flag, I didn't think it would be relevant for this room, but just in case, if your aggregated turnover, so that income of your business and all the businesses connected with it goes over 20 million, you're not eligible for the refundable program. You go into a different program. Same rules around what is R&D, but different rules around how you get paid and how you see that benefit. Not going to bother covering those today. Are we all good?
Yep.
Cool.
Shut up, carry on.
Good. I was a bit worried that maybe it froze 5 minutes ago and I didn't realize. Cool. All right, what is an R&D activity? As I said, today's not a deep dive, but this concept that's on the screen now is really important. If you were to take one thing away, it would probably be this. Your R&D, you have eligible R&D activities, and that's really key. They're not projects, they're activities. So you need to get down onto a level of granularity is what am I doing today? Not today, sorry, but what is the work that I'm doing on an activity basis? And they're either core or supporting to be eligible. So a core R&D is a experiment where you didn't know the outcome and you're creating new knowledge, all that stuff I talked about before. And you're following that systematic approach. I'm going to throw a couple of examples up shortly, but keep that in mind. It's an experiment and you're taking a scientific approach. It's a really structured approach. And then you can also include supporting R&D. And this is often actually where a lot of the costs sit, is the other work that goes around that. It's not an experiment in itself, but it is directly related to one or more of your core R&D activities. So that concept of having at least one core R&D activity, if you have that, more often than not, you're going to qualify a lot of other work that happens around that. Just to be clear, you can't have supporting only, although there are maybe a few quirks of the scheme where where you can do things like my core R&D activity is happening in the future. So if you feel like I'm only supporting R&D now, my R&D happens later, then it's still probably worth looking at this program because you might be able to claim that now. All right, so I've thrown a couple of examples up on here. I won't read them all, but just to gauging the room, I think maybe the first three are probably more relevant. So I'll talk to maybe the fintech one and the AI one. So in software as a service, software development by its nature is usually design, build, test, but it's not always R&D. You still need to be ticking those boxes about the new knowledge, the uncertain outcomes, and the systematic progression of works. Often you can take a body of software development that wouldn't otherwise be R&D and start to structure it as R&D. So if you've got a future project, it might be worth considering, hey, look, if we made some tweaks, this would be eligible for this funding. This business is developing an engine to assess real-time creditworthiness of gig workers. In other words, people whose profiles didn't fit the normal, I guess, types of technology that the banks and other organizations use to test creditworthiness. And so that was their core R&D, was, I guess, design, build, test that engine. The supporting R&D was engineering around the different systems that are going to bring in all the data. I think, in an example like this, it might be 100 sources of data that this tool is going to pull in. And some of the engineering around that, the APIs, etc., connecting it all up, not R&D in itself, can be done. They're usually probably following a framework, but together, it's an R&D activity. AI, ML.
Sorry, I was just putting my hand up. Richard has just asked, is not startup all unknown and agile, as you say, design and test? Do you need I think I'm reading this really badly. Do you need?
I can see it there.
Yeah, you read that. I think it's a mix of me reading it badly.
You're doing a great job. Yeah.
So the first point, I see what you're saying, but no, there are startups that do not deal with unknown outcomes. There are some great businesses that BlueRock works with at the moment that are startups that are having a great deal of success. Their technology that they've built didn't qualify for the tax incentives. Not everything is unknown. I often use the example, again, it's a bit silly, but an engineer, an architect, and some builders can come together and build a house in a way that has never been built before. It's completely bespoke. It might be on land that's never had a building on it before, but they didn't do any R&D. There's no materials. There's no new types of concrete or new structures that they're building. All the systems are known. They've installed heating, cooling, etc. It's all understood. It's new, it's novel, but it's not R&D. And then the second part of your question is, you talk about agile, design, build, test. So this is regulated by two bodies. One is the ATO because it's a tax incentive. The other is the called DISR, or DISR, and DISR is quite hot on this point. They don't consider something being agile as being research and development because they've taken that term to mean it's not systematic and it's not planned. So that probably is going more towards an argument about semantics, but I wouldn't consider agile work to be R&D either. By its nature, you can have agile work that is R&D, but saying something is agile does not mean it is R&D. I could probably go on about that one for much longer, but I won't. AI, as I was saying, really popular space at the moment. As you can imagine, in my world, a lot of people are coming to us with AI claims, AI for this, AI for that. There is a lot of research and development in AI. As a space, it lends itself very well to these rules because usually there are unknown outcomes when you're building something. It's not always the case. In my team, we've built AI that we use. It's not new. It's not novel. We use tools in the way they were meant to be used. we've invented something new for us, but it's not, it's not a global invention. But the example I put up there was around perhaps using an AI model to take visual footage, so footage collected from drones and weather data, localized weather data, and try and predict which way bushfires will move in real time. So there's complexity with that, I guess, by its very nature, but the additional complexity of often those drones have low vis given the smoke billowing around. So how can we train the model to pick out patterns of dry bush, etc., areas where there are no breaks, and that the fire is going to be keep moving through the land, and also do things like highlight buildings and things where that are in the path of those fires. Labeling the drone footage, it wasn't anything new. They were taking footage and going, here's a house, here's a road, etc. But it was eligible as a supporting activity. Cool. Last thing on R&D activities, and then I'll get into some of maybe the more tips and tricks type information. So there are excluded core R&D activities. So core R&D can still be supporting, but the activities on the screen now are activities where you are actually not allowed to claim them as your experiment. So, for example, the third dot point, research in social sciences, arts, or humanities, it's talking about, so if my research is in something like education, so a method for teaching children so that they learn, maybe they're children who have missed out on some schooling, and my research is in, how do we teach them to catch up on some schooling? It's not going to be eligible as a core R&D activity. Don't have to like that, but that's in the rules. So we really focused on those fields of science, not social science, and technology. And if anyone has questions about that they want to take offline, that is something that I can help with, and we can really break that out, because it is quite a, I guess it's quite a complex area of the rules. All right. Record keeping. So there has always been a requirement to keep detailed records of your R&D to claim this tax incentive. That was probably not policed. It was kind of like, we just expect everyone's doing this. If we really don't like something, we'll throw it out. But if you don't have records, it's a bit of a slap on the wrist. Now, what's happened in the last 3 years is, as a regulatory, I guess, reaction to a lot of overclaiming and perhaps some misappropriation of the scheme, the regulators have come in and gone, no, everyone's got to have records, they've got to be really detailed, and they've got to be near perfect. I don't want to see any gaps. So if you are claiming this now, thinking you'll claim it, helping someone else claim it, it's really important that you are focused on record keeping. It is a burden. I don't think I've ever worked with a business that wants to keep records to this degree of detail, but I guess it's essential. That it's non-negotiable, let's say. So, Megan, do we share the slides afterwards? I guess I can put them in Slack, actually. That's my own question.
Sorry, yes, somebody's already asked for them, and we've said yes, we'll share them. And there's also going to be a recording that people can go back to. Good
stuff. So again, I know I'm not going to bore you by reading these out, but what's on the screen here, if you use this like a checklist and you're undertaking R&D and you go, do I have all of these things? Probably, it's situational. Sometimes they won't apply to your field, but most of these things at the end of financial year, you should be able to say, yep, for my R&D that I'm going to claim, I've got all of the items on the screen here. So again, I couldn't overstate how critical this is for claimants. All right, so how does it all work? It is a tax incentive, and therefore it is claimed in your tax return. So if we're talking about a financial year, which is probably quite appropriate given it's early July, you plan your R&D, I encourage every business to have an R&D plan and to reset it annually. It could be a one-pager, it could be super vague, but it is an important legislative requirement that you actually intend to undertake R&D. Like, it's not an afterthought. Get stuck into it. That's your department. You go and do what you do best, undertake your R&D and keep those records. Right. Towards the end of the financial year, assuming you're going to get a refund, so you're going to want to be quite quick to claim because it's cash. You create a portal account. Just Google that one. You set up your company. Your company should be set up at the start of financial year, by the way. Don't do that too late. You're going to link that account to your company. You're going to prepare what's called an R&D application that happens in the portal. It's quite descriptive. It's going to have, per activity, anywhere between 2 and maybe 15 questions to answer, depending on what type of activity it is. You're going to write that up. You go away, you calculate your expenditure. So sometimes that's complex because you need to apportion costs. You might go, oh, hang on, we bought 10,000 buttons, but we only used 3,000 in R&D, so we can only claim 30% of the buttons that we purchased. You submit your application. I guess you submit your application to DISA, but you submit your claim in 2 parts. Your written claim, that goes off to DISA through that portal, and you've got 10 months after the end of financial to lodge it. You can't do it early, but it opens on the 1st of July. You send that off to them. They're pretty quick. They'll register your claim in anywhere between sort of 2 and 20 days. Then you lodge when you get that back, it gives you a little magic code, and you use that to lodge your tax return with something called an R&D schedule that if you're using a tax accountant, they should be able to help you with. If you're not, it's relatively complex area. I'd at least be reading the ATO guidance pretty closely and preferably using a tax agent to lodge your company tax return, income tax return. Cool. Last slide from me, Alex. Couple of things you probably won't read in the guidelines. I've mentioned the R&D plan already. Copying and pasting. So it's an annual application. So the temptation is to take what you put in last year that got registered and go, oh, worked last year, let's go again. So we know that this is a behavior that is looked upon really poorly by DISA. They're of the view that you're another year wiser, your research and development program has moved forward a whole nother year. Don't tell us what happened the year before. Tell us what happened now, tell us what's relevant. So copying and pasting is a big no-no. Claim your full entitlement, but don't overclaim. In other words, push this program to the limit. It's there for you to use, but don't overclaim. Don't fall in. I guess it's tempting, right? The money's right there. If I just put in another $1,000, well, I'll get another $435 back. But I would never include things that are just business as usual, things that costs that you were going to incur anyway. They didn't really have any connection to your R&D. Commercial costs, things like marketing, often legal fees, those sorts of things are not, I highly recommend don't get claimed. And then poorly substantiated costs. So things where you might have an invoice from a contractor, you can't really remember what they did, but you think, oh, it was probably R&D, I'll throw that in. I'd be going to a higher degree of detail than that. The risks there are around audits, repayments, which are especially painful for early stage businesses because often they've gone straight out and spent that cash that they claim back, and even penalties and fines on directors of the company for overclaiming if they were negligent in their action. Couple more things. Make it about science and technology. We talked about this before, but really hone in on, okay, what is my field of science or technology that I work in? Take records. I guess that's been done to death in this conversation. And if you're stuck, someone like me, my role is to help you. And there are many R&D advisors. There are good and bad R&D advisors. Find one that suits you and reach out to them. It's better to ask questions sooner rather than later. This is a quick slide about what BlueRock does, and I will hand that over to Alex.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. Importantly, mentioning that you've got to work with a good R&D advisor. Importantly for our process, and which we'll run through as well, you do need to work with a good, knowledgeable R&D advisor. Why we do these sessions with Tom is that we really respect and like the work that they do. We know, like, and trust it, and they can go a big way when you're going through this process. There was a question in the chat, Tom. Sylvina was asking if there's any tips or best practices for tracking R&D in Xero. That feels like a question that was probably best for you, if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, absolutely. So Xero is a really good tool to tick that financial record keeping box. A couple of quick fire ones, Sylvina, and then maybe I'll put some in the Slack afterwards. Actually upload the receipts. So there's that function in there where you have an expense, you can upload the receipts. I'd even be throwing it, if it's a contract, if it's a supplier with a contract, I'd often be uploading the contract into there. It just makes sure that's more of a like, now I know where it is type thing. I'm not going to be rushing around looking for it in 2 years when I get an ATO audit. And then the other thing I would do is I would start to actually use your ledgers. So typically on the P&L, I would start to code your R&D into special categories. So I'd go R&D contractors, and I'd code my costs into that ledger. R&D materials goes in that ledger. And you can get as detailed as you want. Sometimes my clients will do it by project, project A, contractors, R&D. So Xero is great for that. And the tracking, by the way, as well. You can obviously use the tracking function if you're a user who knows what that is.
I love the tracking function.
Yeah, super helpful, especially when you get to year end and you are going to put your claim together, right? And you've got to think about what you did 9 months prior and find all the information.
Things like that don't take that long. And then you can start to know real time what your R&D is. As soon as you're reconciling your accounts, you can go, no, I know I've spent 100,000 this year. I know I'm entitled to 43.5% of that back. Really quick and easy.
Yeah, and
high impact.
Yeah, it's a hidden asset in the business, right? And then it can be leveraged up for what we do. So guess it's a good segue into talking about the finance and capital side of R&D. Tom touched on R&D being the largest innovation incentive in Australia, which is right. I think the recent ATO stats said that 12,000 companies last year received $4.4 billion in refunds, which is tremendous. It's huge, has a massive impact for the early stage scale up and startup environment, and is something that everyone should be looking at maximizing in the right way. So everything that Tom went through before is really useful to help do that. Also sort of switch tacks a little bit and talk about what we do at Advanced and how you can utilize that R&D tax incentive really as a strategic asset and a bit of a capital flywheel when you use it as a tool in tool belt. But you're probably wondering, who I am. Very brief background. I started my life as an accountant. I have spent the last decade working across venture capital, alternative lending, and being a scale-up CFO for a couple of tech businesses. We used an R&D lending product from some of our investors to help scale those businesses, and I really saw the power of what it could do. But I always thought there was a better way to do it, hence founding Advanced over the last 18 months. And we'll go a bit more into the product of what we do. Before we do that, a bit of a disclaimer, or as I like to call it, a bit of a greetings from my lawyers. This presentation and what we talk about is not intended to be professional advice specific to your circumstances. It is general advice, and everyone's circumstances are different. So go seek someone that's knowledgeable and professional like Tom to have a discussion about your specific circumstances, make sure that what we're talking about actually fits you. When we're thinking about capital, right, capital is challenging, it's hard to access, and it's really not the core business of why someone set out to do what they're doing. Like, they find a problem generally that they're wanting to solve, that they make their life's mission, and capital raising is a key skill set and necessary to get your business off the ground, but it isn't a core part of your business. There was recent stats where it came out that rounds were taking an average about 3 months to close. Most recent stats have seen that that's actually been pushed out further, and it's up to 5 or 6 months, particularly in sectors where it's deep tech or there's a lot of science-based IP involved. So when you're thinking about capital, it's not just thinking about how you can access capital, what the different sources are, but also the timing to get that done, because it is distracting from the business, and you want to get on with actually commercializing your business or getting into market, finding product market fit, and then scaling. So when looking at that journey that you go through, and I'm sure a lot of people here have seen this before, and some people like to call it the valley of death or the valley of growth, but really it's the journey a company takes from idea all the way through to market fit and then maturity. And when you're moving along that curve, you have different ways that you can access capital or different sources of capital that's available. Typically, when you're looking at R&D tax incentive, it can fit all the way along, but it comes back to those core supporting activities and all of those factors that Tom talked about before. When you're looking at like different pools of capitals to access, you've got your typical equity pools, which is your 4Fs, your founder fans, family and fools, your angels, and then your venture capital and other sources as well. But there all are other sources that are non-dilutive, meaning they don't cost equity, they don't cost ownership. And these are bootstrapping, so using your own funds as a director or a shareholder, as a founder. If you are bootstrapping and you're looking at R&D tax incentive or are receiving R&D tax incentive, there are various elements that you need to keep in mind. So talk to someone knowledgeable about that. Loan agreements and other things need to have certain features to make sure that they are eligible for the R&D tax incentive. And when you're getting up to 43.5% back as a cash refund in your pocket, it's a huge difference to the company. Other sources include grants, crowdfunding. In Australia, crowdfunding is mostly equity, but you can forward sell your product through crowdfunding. There's revenue and royalty-based financing as well, and other debt funding, which R&D finance, which is what we're talking about today, is part of. Whether you can access these different funding sources or not really depends about the stage of the company and different factors. A lot of early stage companies are not typically credit worthy, but you can utilize R&D tax incentive and debt funding to build a capital flyway and really compound what you get out of it. So when you're looking at like what type of funding is right for your business, you kind of need to look at a few different things. It's the stage of your business, what you can access, because typically debt is harder to access in earlier stages, but also the cost of that capital. And an optimal capital structure will have typically both debt and equity in it, subject to what your business is actually doing. But overall, you want to minimize the cost of capital. And that's to ensure that you can keep the most equity or keep the most value for founders, their management teams, their employees, and earlier investors. So when you do raise equity or you do raise investment, how can you increase that by 43.5%? We did see through the R&D tax incentives, yes, but it's not just a refund. It can actually be used to build a capital flywheel. Now, when we're talking about a capital flywheel, we're actually talking about using debt against the R&D tax incentive. So that cash refund that gives you your cash back on expenditure, their businesses like Advanced place value on those incentives, whereas typical banks don't. And what this means is that as you're moving throughout the year and you're spending money, you're accruing an asset that can be unlocked early and compounded. So we give cash against that R&D tax incentive and we unlock that capital earlier, which means that you can accelerate, but it also means that you pull that forward. So while it is technically debt, we kind of think about it as recycling future capital, and that's what really starts to build that flywheel. So if you look at it, it's non-dilutive. What that means is you keep more control and more equity in your company, and ultimately over the journey of a company, 3, 5, 7 years, that can mean a lot in the end of the day. There's less red tape and you keep more control. So debt funders and R&D lenders like Advanced don't take board seats or management control, and we can get that to you fast. So we've funded deals the same day as receiving information, but typically it's within 24 to 48 hours of getting from all the information to having funds in your bank when approved. But how does that capital flywheel really work, and how do you start to compound that? Well, when you loan against that future R&D tax incentive, and you can see here on the right, you've got this bit of a flywheel on compounding motion. So when you raise money or you spend on R&D, you can either wait to the end of the year and claim your refund after year end, or you can look at financing it early. That means you get more cash as a loan to reinvest in your business, which means you can spend on more R&D and you can start to accelerate. What actually happens though is you actually start to make a positive net return out of that capital. There's a bit of an example here over 4 quarters of what this can actually mean on a $250,000 expenditure. And this 4 quarters doesn't need to be a financial year. It can be any 4 quarters. And when you start to look at this at a longer period of time, it can actually be way more beneficial and can give you a higher return on investment. If you look here on sort of the first column, which is the first quarter, you've got R&D expenditure of $250,000. So this assumes that you spend $250,000 on eligible R&D, you're entitled to the refund, and that is going to give you $108,000 as a accrued refund. We would then fund 80% of that as cash now, so that gives you $87,000. And if you continue to spend on R&D in the subsequent period, you then use that capital to then create more of a refund. So that $87,000 becomes an additional $37,000 refund accrued, which then you can actually loan against again. So you can actually do it multiple times, and really it doesn't need to be quarterly, it can be monthly, it can be once or twice a year. It really depends on the underlying business. But if you take that over 4 quarters, what it does is it turns that $250,000 expenditure on your project, or developing your product, or doing that research, getting it into market, and it turns it into $377,000 spent on it. That then translates to $164,000 as a refund. And when you take off finance and borrowing costs of about 20 grand, you end up with $144,000 as a refund. Now, when you take that and you look at that back in the first column again and have a look at, we originally had $250,000 expenditure and got $108,000, you're $36,000 better off. So that's $36,000 that wasn't in your company before, and it can be used to then reinvest into the business to whatever you need to get to that next stage. So this is a real, we'll go through a real case study. This has been anonymized. This is actually a real business that we have funded, one of many. And we've called it Project Regional Delivery. So what this company was doing was developing an autonomous drone to overcome regulation hurdles in Australia, but to reduce the cost of delivering logistics into regional areas. So if you think critical medical supplies in hard to reach regional communities that are either locked out by drought or flooding or other natural disasters, or in critical times of need, they can get those supplies to them quicker and faster. This particular company had a university shareholder. They also had a university contracted for their R&D. Now, not all companies are going to have that, but you can still have eligible R&D in your company, as Tom ran through. This particular company raised $500K in investment to really prototype that drone. So they spent on things like salaries, materials, rent, contract payments for undertaking R&D eligible activity back to the university and other contractors. And using that $500K, we then lent them $313,000. They can use that to accelerate and grow their business, which meant that they increased their expenditure by $260K for R&D and increased their refund by $112,000. Now, over the term of the loan, which was nearly 12 months, we charged them about $30,000 in interest. But at the end of the day, they ended up $83,000 better off because they used our capital to increase their refund. Now, that's $83,000 they didn't have before, that they didn't need to sell equity for. But it also meant they actually got to spend $313,000 more into what they were doing and what they were developing, and that was equity free. So it becomes really important when you look at like cash returns with using R&D funding and pulling forward that cash and what that means from a commercial point of view. They ultimately got to spend more and commercialize quicker. They generated a net return on investment with the funding without dilution, and they actually achieved a higher chance of success because they could run faster, prototype quicker, and pivot if they needed to with using more capital that they didn't need to sell part of their company for. But that's just one example. We've funded over 70 businesses We've funded everything from LPG IoT to advanced manufacturing in glass to a company going through phases of clinical trials, SaaS in the NDIS space, and AI SaaS, and a whole lot more. So as long as you're eligible or will be eligible for R&D, you can look at starting to utilize what an R&D funding mechanism might do for the business to allow you to bring on talent and resources faster and ultimately get into market quicker and have a higher chance at success. So I know that every founder really sets out to solve a problem. They find something that they're passionate about and they want to get that into market. But when you're raising capital, it is challenging. So I really urge you, when you do raise capital, to be different, to be smarter with that capital, and look at R&D funding and R&D tax incentive to get you a compounding capital flywheel.
Amazing. I've just seen a question in the chat. How many months, years of R&D refunds do you have to evidence for Advanced to consider lending against the R&D investment? And before you answer, I just want to commend myself about how well I read that out as well versus the first question I tried.
Yeah, for us, we've funded first year claims. So if it's the first year that you're claiming R&D, we have funded against those claims. Typically, it is best if you've had at least 1 year of R&D claims under your belt, where you've had those activities registered with Aussie Industry or DISA, and then had a tax return claim come in. We fund in as little as 24 to 48 hours, but that's typically where you've had a previous claim. If it's a first year claim, we need to understand the activities a bit more and the record keeping behind it, because we get repaid from that refund coming in. So we just want to make sure that the details are correct, that we understand it, and that we can really work with you on a business. Where you do have multiple years of claims and you're looking at the future, what we've actually done for some companies as well is going, okay, we've got this sort of first loan that we're doing, but what are the capital requirements for, say, the next 12 or 24 months? And we've done longer term loans where you can actually just draw down capital as you're going along. And we've seen that be really beneficial for businesses where they need to go raise additional equity, but they can go raise a smaller amount of equity and get a lot further.
Amazing. And Richard's just said, good overview. How and who to contact? Do you want the inventor or startup owner as he is an advisor?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we have deals and companies we fund come through many sources, right? Many channels. Typically throughout the process, we're always happy to have a chat with the inventor, startup owner, or the advisor. We will get the founder or the management team involved in some part of the process. Typically from the early stage, happy to just do it with the advisor, give information that we'll start to need, understand what the business is doing, who they're using for R&D, kind of the process they've been through. But there's nothing like hearing it from the horse's mouth. We do, and we'll have a chat with the management team or the founder as we progress.
Amazing. I guess we can open it up to just general Q&A if anyone else has any other questions on any component that we've covered. Otherwise, we might have some time back in our diaries.
Alex, right, you probably want to speak.
Oh, who's that?
I think that's Tom, but it might be
me not putting my mic up. Alex, I think ultimately you'd probably want to speak with the director of that company, right, at some stage. The company that you'll be writing the loan to, we'd be the same. Usually, we'll definitely have to speak to the finance person and the technical person, but ultimately a director, if you think about how a claim is actually made, it's made by a company, and a company has a brain, and that brain is the director of that company. So ultimately, they're the sorts of people who do need to be involved, but that's not to stop you, Richard, or any other advisors, I guess, flagging the opportunity. In fact, I'd encourage you to, because despite being worth billions of dollars, the program is actually not known, and typically not known by early stage companies as well. We're talking about this, perhaps most people here weren't in the room, but early stage companies, but by their nature, they're sort of just tunnel vision, focused on product, focused on survival probably. and they're not really thinking about tax or funding or anything, and sometimes until it's too late.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. And doing it really early gets the structure correct from the get-go. I would urge advisors, whether you're on an advisory board or you're in some more, capacity that you're actually consulting and engaging with the company, definitely bringing it up to the company. One, it can help them get further, but it can also help them, pay for your services too. If they're getting R&D and unlocking that earlier, they've got more cash to spend. But it also positions you quite well where you're actually knowledgeable and knowing about growth of the company and really invested in their journey. So hugely would be bringing it up to them. And I'd mirror those other comments too, Tom. It's a very, very undereducated space. There was 13,000 applications last year, 12,000 got the refund. I heard a few weeks ago at a conference that there was 14,000 applications put in for 2024, which just closed a few months ago. And unofficially, there has been word from Oz Industry that they believe the real number of applications should be about 30,000. So I think there's a lot of companies out there that may be eligible that just aren't educated and aren't putting in claims. The more we can do as a community and ecosystem to help more companies, the better.
Yeah, I love this. It's incredible. Has anyone else got any other questions? It just feels like, the service that you're offering, Alex, is so incredible in terms of being able to propel growth, and it really excites me to be able to tell people about that. If there's no other questions, then we can wrap up here. I am going to send out the recording. We will send out the slides as well. The channel is open with Alex and Tom, and they'll sort of own the channel and Slack until Monday, end of day. And so if you've got any questions that you think of post the presentation, you can absolutely jump in there. Just make sure you tag them so they can see that. But other than that, thank you so much, Alex and Tom. I felt like I learned a lot. And I'm like, how do I build something that I can just, it's considered R&D? But yeah, we really appreciate it. It was an awesome session.
All good.
Yeah.
Thanks for inviting us along, Megan.
Thanks for having us. Thanks for everyone attending. Really appreciate it. Have a great rest of your day and weekend.
Amazing. If you guys drop off,
yeah, bye.
Hang around, Alex and Tom. We'll come.
No worries.